Presidents have these moments in the course of their time in office where people are looking to them for leadership. They're looking for them for direction, for meaning, and you have to call upon yourself to not only deliver words that capture your point, but that also inspire people to act. Hello, my name is Valerie Jarrett, and I am a former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. I served in his administration for all 8 years.
Members of Congress.
This is Veep, and the episode is directed by Chris Addison.
I'd like to begin today.
In this scene, Selina Meyer finds herself in a very awkward spot when her teleprompter goes down at the beginning of the State of the Union. Every person who speaks before a teleprompter, that is your worst nightmare. And usually, and certainly at a State of the Union, the way you protect for that happening is you have a hard copy of the script in front of you. There isn't a time President Obama went to the lectern where there wasn't also a book right there, because inevitably teleprompters go down. And I will say it went down for President Obama at times, but not at a State of the Union. And what you'd see is him just open the book and start to read. And oftentimes what you'll do is keep the book open and turn the pages as you're going to try to keep up, so that if it does go down, you're not scurrying to find your place. But I can just imagine what went through her mind when she's looking at a blank screen. There's a teleprompter operator, and usually they work with the candidate. You know them, you trust them, you have confidence in them. You want the teleprompter to go at the speed that the person who's reading it is comfortable. And you can go too fast or you can go too slow, and it loses the rhythm. It's really a team effort.
So today I don't just want to talk about the present, I want to talk about the future. Whatever we have in store.
And you can see what's on the teleprompter from some of the remote locations. You can look right at the teleprompter. It's beginning to sink in that it's not a current draft, but it becomes very clear in a minute.
No. I think this version still has President Hughes' old spending plan in it.
We will invest $60 billion in the new N620 submarine fleet.
It's beginning to sink into everybody that she's announcing a policy that's actually not her policy. There's no way President Obama would have read something that wasn't what he meant. He would have just changed it at the last minute on the fly. But that's hard to do. And I think for somebody like Selina Meyer, who doesn't necessarily know that much about what her policies are to begin with, but you could tell on the expression on her face that she thought, this isn't what I'm supposed to be saying. But she kept saying it anyway.
You were supposed to take the submarine cuts out, not spend an extra $10 billion on them. Now, Gary?
After a mistake is made, the senior staff come in together with the president and try to figure out how to fix it. Now, we would have also met on our own without President Obama in the room first to try to come to him with some options available and give him the benefit of our best thinking. President Obama was so disciplined and he knew his policies in backwards and forwards that he didn't tend to misspeak. That's not to say that everything was flawless. I mean, I can think of an example of where he was in a press conference on the Affordable Care Act, and at the very end of the press conference, he gets asked a question about Skip Gates and police arresting him in his own home.
My understanding is that Professor Gates then shows his ID to show that this is his house. And at that point, he gets arrested for disorderly conduct.
That wasn't according to plan, and so then you have to figure out, well, what to do about that. But he really stuck to his speeches. So we spent a lot of time and effort making sure that we crafted President Obama's speeches in his words and reflecting his policies. We would send drafts up to him the night before at home, and if it was a serious speech like the State of the Union, he would have received multiple drafts over the course of several weeks. And so by the time he actually delivered the speech, he was absolutely sure about every word that was in it.
Now, Gary? Mm-hmm. Glasses?
Yep.
Well, as the nation's first female vice president, I don't think she did right by our gender. I think that this show really was a caricature of what a woman would be and not necessarily the best role model. And I'm happy to know that reality will be very different.
I'll be with you in a second.
This is The American President, directed by Rob Reiner. This scene with Sydney, played by Annette Bening, thinks she's in a little bit of trouble when the president asks to see her privately in the Oval Office.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Mr. President,
Is it all right if I call you Sydney?
Of course. Mr. President.
First of all, what happened before this scene is that the president walked in and overheard Sydney being critical of the president in a meeting. Now, Sydney's a lobbyist, and so her trade is that she's got to stay on good terms with everybody while she's pushing for her agenda.
Mr. President, what you saw in there was nothing more than vanity run amok. I was showing off for a colleague who doesn't think very much of me. It would be a real injustice for you to hold the GDC accountable for my behavior today, on top of which I am monumentally sorry for having insulted you like that.
So first of all, I can't think of a single time President Obama was alone in the Oval Office with a lobbyist. You always want to have somebody else in the room with you, particularly with a lobbyist, to double check and make sure that nothing gets repeated that isn't actually true. So it would have been very unusual.
The GDC is asking for 20%, sir.
It's not going to pass at 20%. It's a long shot at 10.
How do you know that until you put the full weight of the White House behind it?
We had very strict restrictions on what lobbyists could and could not do, because we'd seen far too often where lobbyists use their influence to try to sway policymakers to do what wasn't in the best interest of the American people. And so walling ourselves off from them was really important to President Obama. The president's private time totally depends upon the president. President Obama always asked us to put on his schedule time during the day where he could just think. Now, I will say, when we all saw that time on the schedule, we violated that wish all the time because we thought, well, he's in there on his own. We can go and ask him about X, Y, and Z. But I do think it's really important that a president has time to reflect and to think, because otherwise you can just be reacting. There were many times when President Obama wanted to escape, and I remember one time he said, well, what would happen if I just started to walk towards the gates of the White House, and do you think the Secret Service would stop me? And I said, yeah, I don't think you'd get very far. But there were also times where he said, look, I'm going for a walk, and there had to be a lot of preparation that went into that walk, but I remember he just walked outside of the gates and started walking up to everyday people, and they're like, oh my gosh, there's the president. It was unusual, though, to allow somebody into the Oval Office, particularly a lobbyist, to an empty room. And the fact that the president was still in his private quarters in the back while Sydney's wandering around the Oval Office, that would never happen. What I like about this scene is that the camera's shooting from the ceiling, and I think oftentimes when people see the Oval Office, they don't realize how high the ceiling is, and it is a magnificent ceiling.
Mr. President,
Did you know the city planners, when they sat down to design Washington, D.C., their intention was to build a city that would intimidate and humble foreign heads of state? It's true.
I didn't know that.
The White House is the single greatest home court advantage in the modern world.
I don't know whether the White House was designed to intimidate foreign heads of state, but it certainly does. I have seen the most confident, powerful, arrogant leaders walk into the Oval Office and just crumble before your very eyes. It is, by design, very intimidating. And he's trying to figure out, well, how can I make her comfortable? So he's not trying to intimidate her, he's really just trying to hit on her.
Are you hungry? I skipped breakfast. You want to have a donut, coffee or something?
Sir, I'm a little intimidated by my surroundings. And yes, I have gotten off to a rocky and a somewhat stilted beginning, but don't let that diminish the weight of my message.
Look, it's very hard to be a single president for the reasons, in this instance, in this movie, they're obvious, which is you have potentially an inherent conflict of interest, particularly if the person who you fall in love with is a lobbyist.
The GDC has been at every president for the last decade and a half that global warming is a calamity, the effects of which will be second only to nuclear war. The best scientists in the world have given you every reason to take the GDC seriously, but I'm going to give you one more. If you don't live up to the deal you just made, come New Hampshire, we're going to go shopping for a new candidate.
So what you were seeing is a negotiation between the president and a lobbyist. Again, unprecedented in my mind in terms of what President Obama did while he was in office. But people do make deals all the time, and I think the point he was trying to make to her is, I'm not going to make this happen for you unless you can get a substantial number of votes. And if you can get well on the way, I will help push it over the top. Deals do happen all the time, but deals change.
You can't do that, Sydney.
With all due respect, Mr. President, who's going to stop me?
Well, if you go through that door, the United States Secret Service. That's my private office.
Ah.
You have to go out that door over there.
The room is confusing because the doors blend into the wall, and there are 3 doors, and I could see she came in one door and she just started heading towards the door, and you can't really tell the difference between the door that goes to the outer oval, the door that goes to the hallway, and the door that goes to the private office, and she clearly got confused, and so it was a funny way of putting her in check that you can't go out the wrong door or bad things can happen.
Well, it's in the bag. You have someone here to show off for.
This is the TV show The West Wing, directed by Alex Graves. In this scene, President Bartlett's wife cuts off his tie just moments before the debate.
By the way, I feel bad. I don't think I've done enough to help you prepare for this debate.
Why are you telling me this now?
Just 'cause.
Oh my God. You're insane. You're insane! Charlie!
Obviously, what Abby was trying to do is take his mind off of what was about to happen. It sent the staff scurrying, looking for the tie.
Get you to the stage. We got that kind of time. 15 seconds. We'll get it.
No one sent camera tests on this.
I loved it when CJ said, this color hasn't been tested. Well, who cares? It's just a tie. But it's the kind of attention to detail that the senior staff has paid a lot of attention to, and then suddenly it erupts into chaos. And it really did achieve what Abby was trying to do. President Obama is really hard to ruffle under any circumstances. And so I'm sure he would have just, leaned over and said to Reggie Love, who was his body guy at the time, "Hey, Reg, give me your tie." But I could easily see how Michelle Obama would have tried to do something to just distract him, settle him, remind him that this is just a chance to speak directly to the American people and ignore all the noise. The president I knew best, President Obama, prepared very diligently. He took it seriously. He went through a lot of briefing books to make sure that he had his message, affirmative message that he wanted to deliver out, and also, of course, prepare for the inevitable incoming from your opponent.
Americans are tired of partisan politics.
Mr. President.
Actually, what you've done in Florida is bring the right together with the far right. And I don't think Americans are tired of partisan politics. I think they're tired of hearing career politicians diss partisan politics to get a gig.
Every president does it differently. I can say for sure that Vice President Biden is going through the same process that President Obama went through. Some of the same people who prepared President Obama are on Vice President Biden's team and Senator Harris's team. But ultimately, it's the test of the candidate. And I know how seriously Joe Biden takes this as well. I can't really speak for his opponent. Moments leading up to the debate are a nightmare for the senior staff. You're trying to think, well, is there anything I forgot to say? But you also don't want to let your stress bleed into the president. And so I know we worked really hard to cover up our anxiety. And I can remember sitting next to former First Lady Michelle Obama at several of the debates. You know the cameras are on you, you can't react, you can see the look on both of our faces. I'm sure we meant to smile, but it's a terrifying moment.
You've used the word liberal 74 times in one day. It was yesterday.
Not sure I can watch anymore.
Most of the advisors are backstage. I sat next to Mrs. Obama because in addition to being an advisor, I was a close friend. We didn't do it in every debate. Sometimes she would sit with other folks and I would be backstage with the rest of the team, but whenever we could, we tried to hang out together. We did not mix with the opponent's team. It looks like everybody's team is in one room together. We had our own room. We had our own communication so that they couldn't overhear what we were saying, but the sense of anxiety amongst both teams was apparent.
Rules for tonight's debate are as follows. A candidate will be asked a question by one of the panelists, and he will have 90 seconds to respond.
Now, I will say, listening to the rules that were being described and then seeing the candidate follow those rules, that's unusual in our current climate. But I will say in President Obama's races, both in 2008 and 2012, his opponents were all pretty respectful of the rules. Didn't mean that they always stayed within their time, didn't mean that they didn't interrupt each other ever, but certainly not the kind of food fight we saw in the first debate of this year's presidential race.
Good morning.
This is Independence Day, directed by Roland Emmerich. In this scene, the president gives a stirring speech to those who are on their way to fight an alien invasion.
Mankind, that word should have new meaning for all of us today. We can't be consumed by our petty differences anymore. We will be united in our common interest.
This is a great scene in that it shows there are moments where the president is trying to motivate and inspire and convince people to put themselves in harm's way and to lift their spirits up. And you can see from the expressions on everybody in the crowd's face, they're hanging on his every word, as one would do for the President of the United States. They're all scared. We'll put aside for a minute that they're battling aliens, but they're going into battle. And the question is he able to inspire them? And I think presidents have these moments in the course of their time in office where people are looking to them for leadership. They're looking for them for direction, for meaning, and you have to call upon yourself to not only deliver words that capture your point, but that also inspire people to act.
The 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. We're going to live on. We're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
I can remember countless times when President Obama gave speeches that were intended to inspire. The speech he gave after the shooting down in Charleston at the Emmanuel Church, where Reverend Pinckney and his 8 parishioners were murdered. And it was a tragic, tragic occasion. And President Obama lifted everyone's spirits by singing Amazing Grace and talking about how important it was for us to heal the racial wounds that had been a part of our country for so long, and not just by tearing down a Confederate flag, but by getting rid of the tensions between police and communities of color, by rebuilding our schools, by making sure that we have places that are safe for people to live, by bringing us together. And so I think presidents should seek out those opportunities to bring people together as opposed to separate us and show our differences are, but rather inspire us.
Let's go.
The only thing that was troubling afterwards is when the president gets in the airplane himself. That would not happen. It would be led by the Secretary of Defense, and it would all be coordinated, though, through the Situation Room, which is able to communicate across our wide network of military all around the world.
I'm a combat pilot, Will. I belong in the air.
Our global pandemic is a threat on the world, and it is certainly a time when we should be coming together. And I guess you could draw an analogy between an alien invasion and a virus that's infecting so many countless people across our country and across the world. And it is a time to put aside political differences. It's a time to listen to science and evidence and develop an honest strategy and speak truthfully to the American people. This country is extraordinarily resilient, and so are our people, but you have to be honest with us.
Okay, before we get started, a couple things I'd like to go over in the budget.
This is Dave, directed by Ivan Lightman. In this scene, Dave, played by Kevin Kline, takes over a cabinet meeting in order to figure out how to afford to pay for a children's shelter.
Back the homeless section of the Simpson-Garner Works bill.
Mr. President, I don't believe that's on your agenda today.
There is no way that anybody sitting in the back bench would interrupt a cabinet meeting, particularly with the press in the room. It's unprecedented. But in this case, of course, he thinks that he's the one who created this president, so he has the right to influence him. But I have never, ever seen anyone interrupt a president in the middle of a cabinet meeting.
Now, the way I see it, we need $650 million in order to keep the project.
So this is a great scene in that I think it's what everybody's fantasy is, that this is what a president should be doing. Should be working with the cabinet to achieve his goals. The sausage being made right out in public with the press there to see it. A couple of things strike me about the scene. Normally, a president would say, look, these are my priorities, and then he would ask his cabinet and his staff to come back to him with some recommendations. But in this scene instead, Dave, who the only 2 people in the scene who know he's not actually the president are the ones who are very unhappy with what he's doing.
Changes in our cash management. For example, according to the OMB, we've got 17 defense contractors who are delinquent in their contracts. Is this true, Frank?
I believe so, yes.
So even though they're late, we keep paying them on time.
One of the things that struck me as different about this cabinet room than President Obama's was the complete lack of diversity around that table. It's just a bunch of white guys who are making important decisions affecting all of our lives, and very few women that you saw in the back benches. It was realistic to see the press all bunched together in one corner, always very, very close, all trying to get that exact same shot, bumping into each other, the cameramen and the reporters kind of jockeying for position. But the working meeting, as you will, in the way that this happened, is very unusual. One of the disadvantages of making decisions on the spot like this is that you haven't necessarily thought through all of the implications of it. He's asking his cabinet to respond without the benefit of advice and counsel from their advisors. It doesn't allow for the kind of due diligence and thoughtful deliberation that usually leads to better decisions.
Now, instead of giving them money for something they haven't finished, we could hold back that cash, stick it in some interest-bearing savings account. Yes?
Well, as a senior advisor, I would have been sitting in the back row where you saw the two guys who were actually objecting to what was going on. And it would be very unusual for me to offer my opinion unless the president turned around and asked for it. The president runs the cabinet meeting according to his wishes, which is why I think everybody turned around, because that just doesn't happen in a cabinet meeting. This is Mars Attacks, directed by Tim Burton. In this scene, the Martians attack the White House.
Theodore, I simply do not feel that linkage.
It's a full-scale invasion. Mr. President, we're going to need to get you to safety.
There are enormous precautions that are taken to keep the White House safe. Obviously, I'm not going to discuss a lot of those security cautions, but anytime anything comes into the sphere around the White House, there are alert systems. And the military would have been scrambled. You would have seen jets up in the sky. There would have been a lot more of a presence of our military long before you saw flying saucers get that close to the Washington Monument, let alone to the White House. He would have been swooped out of that Oval Office long before the very last minute. And I can't imagine a situation where you'd see flying saucers so close to the window of the Oval Office and the president and his family still in the Oval Office.
Shouldn't we go this way?
Sorry, ma'am. There's a tour going through here.
The Secret Service would have thought about the route that they wanted the president to take long before an attack was underway. They have all kinds of plans for figuring out how to keep the president as safe as possible, and they would have led the way. So there wouldn't have been the case of the president's wife trying to go in one direction. There would have been Secret Service in front of the president and behind the president, ushering him in the most efficient way and the safest way possible.
House. In fact, it is often used by the president to receive guests. It is furnished to represent the period of James Monroe.
Hey, what's that?
That is a portrait of James Monroe.
If there were any alert systems that were triggered, the tours would have been shut down, the building would have been evacuated, it would have been on lockdown, and people would have moved away from the windows, and you would have seen a lot more presence of Secret Service in every room of the White House. And so the fact that the Martians got that close without any seeming recognition about what was going to happen, pretty unrealistic. And it looked like they were on the state floor going down the stairs. I'm not sure how they got all the way from the West Wing to the residence building. You didn't see them going through the colonnade. They missed a whole bunch of steps between where they started out and where they ended up.
We lost traffic.
Well, we're in sad shape when we need to rely on the children to keep the president safe. And the thought that the First Lady would have been left standing on her own, that would have never happened. The President and the First Lady have their own details, not one detail. So hers would have been surrounding hers, his would have been surrounding his. They would have had a clear path to go. There would not have been twists and turns. It would have been a straight line to the safest possible place they could take them. The bunker is reserved for the President and his family and senior team. So they would have segregated visitors to go into one place and then the president into a secure location. And we absolutely did drills to make sure that we were prepared for every possible scenario. And there were incidents. I mean, I remember once someone came to the west entrance of the White House and was shooting, and we were put on alert, and everybody had to go to a safe location. So there were actual real examples as well as drills. The whole point is to be prepared and to keep both the people who work there, mostly the president, but certainly the rest of his team and family, as well as any visitors who happen to be there, safe as well, and to protect the outside of the building. This is, as we said in the beginning, a really important building. It's symbolic, known the world over, and great lengths are gone to keep it and its occupants safe.
I'm told you got 24 dead and over 200 injured.
This is The Comey Rule, directed by Billy Ray. In this scene, James Comey is interviewed by President Barack Obama for the position of FBI director.
Good to meet you, Mr. President. You too. I should confess, sir, I supported John McCain and Romney.
I know. So, why should I hire you to run the Bureau?
I was not there when President Obama interviewed Mr. Comey. The outside office isn't realistic. It doesn't look like the area where people are held for meetings. And it's interesting because I got the interior pretty well done. President Obama would say, come on in, and go out and greet him the way he did. It showed his demeanor pretty well, and being perfectly willing to consider somebody with whom he might disagree on certain issues if he thought that his character was the kind of character that he wanted in that spot and that he had a great reputation.
Still, it might be easier for me to have an FBI director who agrees with me.
Well, that's true, but you've always struck me as one of those leaders who gains just as much from thoughtful disagreement.
You garnered a lot of attention for taking on the mob as prosecutor and defending the DOJ in 04.
I suppose that's true.
It wouldn't be uncharacteristic for President Obama to say, this is what I've heard about you, and give Comey a chance to agree with it or refute it. In this case, he agreed with it.
You need a lot of attention?
It's not a huge driver for me.
No interest in politics down the line?
None.
Good.
I can't speak to the conversation because I wasn't privy to it. Obviously, it's Jim Comey's recounting of the conversation. But I think the directness and openness and transparency with which the two talked is probably pretty realistic.
If you were to get this job, conversations like this would be impossible. The president and the FBI director have to be at arm's length.
I thought that was a really important scene, and it showed President Obama's respect for the independence of our investigative units, the FBI, the CIA, the Justice Department. All of those were treated at arm's length. The president did have a friendship with Eric Holder, but never discussed ongoing matters with him. And those important lines of demarcation of responsibility are what gives the American people confidence that those investigations are being conducted with integrity. And it certainly was the way I saw those two behave. They were absolutely at arm's length. Comey would have never discussed an ongoing investigation. President Obama would have never asked him for his loyalty to him personally. He asked him for his loyalty to our country. And the independence is a way of evidencing that loyalty to the country. There would have never been a conflict of interest between the two.
One day, you might be called upon to investigate something someone in my party may have done, or someone on my staff, or...
You?
Well, for those investigations to be credible, we cannot be close.
Mr. President, I hope I can look forward to years of not being close with you.
President Obama wouldn't have had him in the Oval Office unless he was being seriously considered for the job. And so it was really at that point Comey's to lose, and also President Obama to say, look, is this somebody who I can trust and have an independent relationship with and know that he's going to do the job of looking out for the people. And I thought it was really important that President Obama signaled to him, we're not going to have a cozy relationship. And we might have gotten along in this interview, but we're not going to have any more conversations like this. And to my knowledge, I can't think of a time he met alone with Comey after that. Certainly, President Obama may have had a very calm exterior and temperament, but he did know exactly the kind of FBI director he wanted. He wanted somebody who would be independent, who would follow the facts wherever they would lie, who would not be intimidated or influenced, and who didn't have any ulterior motive, which is why I think he said, are you interested in politics, and do you let your own ego get out ahead of you at times? And he was looking for that direct assurance that that wasn't the case, so that he could trust him to do his job. The Obamas remain two of my closest friends, and so we are in regular contact. I spent a fair amount of time helping them with the Obama Foundation, which is going to be an extraordinary beacon of hope on the south side of Chicago. I'm working with Michelle Obama on our organization called When We All Vote, designed to change the culture in our country around voting. In the last presidential election, 100 million Americans did not vote. And there are certainly efforts that are out there intended to suppress the vote, but don't disenfranchise yourself. And in this current climate, I would also encourage you to make a plan today, whether you're comfortable voting by mail or taking advantage of an early vote. make a plan and execute it right away. Your voice is your vote. Our democracy is only going to be as strong as we the people demand that it be. That's why our Constitution begins with that phrase, we the people. It's all about us.